Good afternoon. This is Across the Fence, and I'm Jolie Whitney. Our topic today is bats. October 24th through the 31st has been deemed Bat Week, an international annual celebration to raise awareness about the need for bat conservation. There are over 1,400 species of bat worldwide. The smallest bat is the bumblebee bat. It weighs less than a penny and has a wingspan of 4 to 6 inches. Compare that to the flying fox, a genus of bat species with a wingspan of 6 feet. To discuss these oft-maligned mammals, we've asked Allyssa Bennett, the small mammal biologist with Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife, to join us. Allyssa has been with the department for more than a decade in working to promote and protect bats and bat habitat. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about all the kinds of bats that are out there, but not all of those are in Vermont. Can you tell us a little bit about Vermont's bat population, what species we have?
That's correct. We have 9 different species of bats in Vermont. 6 of those stay here all year round, so they hibernate here in the winter, going underground to spaces where they can drop into torpor and make it through our long winters. But then 3 of the other species actually leave Vermont and travel south where they can find warmer areas, just like geese would migrate for the winter.
All right, and you sent us a lot of pictures for this show of cave bats, and a lot of those are endangered or threatened. Can you tell us what those designations mean and what the difference is between them?
That's correct. Incredibly, we have 5 different species in Vermont that are state threatened or endangered, and 2 of those are also federally endangered. We have that protection status because it allows us to do special conservation work for the species to try to help their populations recover. And in this case, the major threat to them is actually white nose syndrome.
Okay, so you mentioned white nose syndrome. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
It's a fungal disease, and it causes mass mortality for a number of these bat species. We actually saw within a very short period of time, just a couple years, around 2008 to 2010, we saw 90% or more of some of these bats just disappear off the landscape. They got very sick in the winter and were dying in the middle of the winter or into the spring. And unfortunately, the disease is here to stay. It's spread across the US and Canada, and these bats face it every winter. Amazingly, though, some of them are actually surviving, and that's where we have some hope.
Okay, and you work with Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and the department keeps track a lot of bat populations. How do you usually do that?
We do that by going out and surveying at night, capturing bats. We actually also have a lot of volunteers around the state who count bats as they come out of structures, such as bat houses, barns, and even people's attics. And that allows us to kind of take a census in those areas. We also go underground in the winter and count the bats by species in caves and mines where they hibernate. So that allows us to watch the population over time. And because of that, and especially the volunteer help in the summer, we have noticed that little brown bats, for example, are actually stabilizing even at that low population level, and that's given us some real hope for the future.
Okay, so back to white nose syndrome. Is that something that humans can contract?
It is not. So far, it appears that it just affects bats, but it affects many different species of bats. As it's spread across the US and Canada, we've seen that new species, especially those that hibernate, seem to be impacted as well.
Okay, and is there a cure or any way to prevent the spread of white nose syndrome?
We collaborate with a lot of researchers around the country to look at different potential treatments. There is a vaccine that's very promising that's being used out on the leading edge, especially for a species such as the northern long-eared bat, which has been really highly impacted. Around 98-99% of the bats have died for that species in some cases, and we're hoping that before the disease arrives in a new site, a treatment like that could potentially prevent them from having such a massive population loss. So there are other examples that we are involved with, biocontrols, for example, that we're looking into to find out whether those could have potential for helping these species survive.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that white nose obviously causes a lot of population loss, but there's also stuff like habitat loss. Can you tell me a little bit about the best ways to protect bats?
Correct. So a lot of these bats actually gather together in large numbers, both in the summer when they're raising their young and also in the winter when they're hibernating underground. And they can be super vulnerable at those times, not only to human disturbance, but also to the loss of that habitat. They might leave for the season, but they'll come back to those same locations year after year. They live a long time. And if they come back and that habitat is not there, they can spend a lot of time and energy trying to find a new place, and there might not be other suitable habitat. So we do a lot of work both through our state regulatory environmental review, looking at habitat that might be important and trying to figure out how to avoid impacts to that. And also when we manage our state lands and work with private landowners, everything from forest management to conversion to other uses, we try to figure out how to protect that that habitat that's important.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Vermont's bat population. What are some key characteristics of the bats here in Vermont?
Yes, we have a lot of species that love to use trees in the summer, and those trees often are trees with peeling bark, with cavities, cracks, and crevices. So something you might look at in your land, your forest behind your house, and say, oh, you know, that's ugly, doesn't have that park-like appearance, maybe we should cut that one down. And those can be really valuable for a lot of wildlife species, especially bats that gather together in those crevices and holes and have a safe space and raise their young. So as long as it's not in danger of falling in your house, that's a great thing to keep in your landscape.
Okay, and you've dedicated your life to bats and protecting them and the study of them. What do you tell people who are maybe afraid of them?
Yes, that we're often afraid of something that we don't know and understand. So I would say probably the most powerful tool we have right now is not necessarily any specific action in terms of land conservation, but it's just sharing this knowledge. When I go and talk to elementary school kids, for example, and they get excited about bats and no longer find them scary, when that information gets passed on and someone else can see your enthusiasm and learn some really simple facts, like even our species can be very small. Little brown bat is only about 3 pennies in your hand, and they can live up into their 30s. So people start to understand these species, and the more you understand about something, usually the less afraid you are.
Okay, and you mentioned working with like middle school organizations and going to visit like classrooms. Is that something you do often?
It is something we do. We sort of spread that out with also talking to conservation commissions and giving talks at public libraries, and then collaborating with researchers around the country. So we get to dabble in a lot of different things that help towards those conservation goals.
And there are a lot of misconceptions about bats, including that like all bats carry rabies. Can you help dispel some of those myths?
That's correct. So although rabies is something that we're very careful of, it's really something that is transmitted from saliva to, from saliva to blood, and it's in less than 1% of the natural population of bats. So it's something that's extremely rare, and we want to take all that with a grain of salt. So we use common sense advice like not picking up bats and other wildlife. So if you give wildlife the space that they need and reach out to us if you have questions or concerns, like a bat popping up in your house, and we can walk you through how to deal with that, then I think there's nothing to be worried about.
Okay, and so we talk about the 3 Bs of pollinators: birds, butterflies, and of course bees. But we can also add another bee to that list, bats. Can you tell me a little bit about the role they play in our ecosystem as pollinators?
Yeah, so we don't have any pollinating species in Vermont, but there are in other parts of the country and the world, and they're responsible for things like agave. And so there are different plant and even food-based plant species that are really important to us, and bats can be the primary pollinator for. And in Vermont, the biggest ecosystem service that they provide is really eating a lot of insects, moths, beetles, even things like mosquitoes. Those can be pests to our forest, pests to our agriculture, even cucumber beetles in your garden are something that big brown bats love to eat.
Okay, so say a bat's moved in, that's living in your garage or your attic. What should people do about that?
Yes, we absolutely understand that although you may think bats are okay, you don't necessarily want them living in your house. That's fine. We have a lot of guidance on our website that can help people with figuring out how to get them out of that space in a way that both protects people and your home and also is safe for the bats. And then we provide free bat houses in the case of folks that have a colony of endangered little brown bats, and that allows the bats to have another place to live when they've lost that home.
All right, absolutely. And based on these photos, it looks like a pretty common occurrence that a bat's moving in, making itself at home.
Yep.
So a lot of those photos, you could see bats a little bit of anywhere, maybe inside an umbrella or, like we mentioned before, in attics. So if you have a bat in your home, what's the plan?
Yes, they do get into the strangest places. Often they'll travel down where they can find airflow and pop up in your fireplace, for example. So if you do find that situation, don't panic, first of all. The bat's probably panicked as well and maybe flying around the room. And I would suggest rather than opening a window that you actually try to contain the bat into one room and stay in that room against the wall, watching until the bat calms down and lands on something, usually a wall or the drapes or something. It's great to have a container, a clear plastic container that you can see through, and then it's just like catching a spider. You put the container over the bat, And then once you've cupped it over the bat, you can use something like a stiff piece of cardboard, a cereal box, and put it underneath. And then you can scoop that bat up and put it outside. Wearing gloves often makes people feel more comfortable, but then you can see what you're doing, and then you can safely release the bat outside. If you're concerned that anyone's had contact with the bat or it was in the room with a sleeping person, you can reach out to the Vermont Health Department and find out if there's a concern for the bat to be tested for rabies.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
For more on Vermont's bats, including instructions on building a bat house of your own, which sounds like a great Halloween party activity to me, visit our website on the screen for the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. I want to thank everyone behind the scenes here at WCAX for making this program possible, and I think it's appropriate to sign off today by saying we will see you back here tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel, for another visit across the fence.